Well, here's another handful of independent horror films that you may not have heard of, but despite their low budgets, they might have that special something that films like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Evil Dead had when they were made on the cheap, with filmmakers powered mainly by hopes and dreams. Let's start binging. Welcome back to ML Miller Frights. I'm ML Miller. Before we begin, please do me a favor and punch that like button down below. Share this video with all of your social media addicted pals. Click subscribe to this channel and ring that bell for notifications. Low Budget Binge is where we venture down the path less traveled and look at low budget, no budget, and sometimes international films that never get that top billing you see with the usual Hollywood fare. I'll indicate in the review down below where you can find these films along with their trailers. Here we go. Camp Pleasant Lake is new on demand from DeskPop Entertainment. It's directed and written by Thomas Walton. Long after a pair of kids went missing at Camp Echo Lake, a profiteer, played by Michael Paré, reopens the camp 20 years later as a horror weekend experience. But when a murderer actually arrives at the camp, it's difficult to distinguish between the act and bloody reality. Camp Pleasant Lake is okay. Well, it's barely that, I guess. It's a low-budget take on a concept seen many times before where someone is being killed and the rest of the group believe it to be an act. Usually the concept is used in horror movies in a boy that cried wolf scenario where the jokester, like Shelley from Friday the 13th Part 3, acts like he's been killed, and then, when he's really injured, the group believes it to be another gag. It's a concept that works for a single bit, but when extended to an entire film, the idea that people can't distinguish between what's real and what's fake is stretched beyond its limits. Unfortunately, stretching that concept is exactly what Camp Pleasant Lake does. Sure, in one instant, the body isn't recovered, and in another, Michael Paré decides that for the sake of making money in the camp, he wants the show to go on. But for the most part, it stretches the illusion that it's all a show past the point of believability, which makes all of the cast look like morons for not picking up on the obvious clues that there's a killer amongst them. But Camp Pleasant Lake isn't without merit. There is some decent gore, and while the mystery of who the killer is seems pretty obvious from the first time the actor appears on screen, the masked killer does go full Jason on the campers pretty decently. I guess if you want to see a bunch of horror convention actors that you might recognize, like Michael Paré, Robert Lasardo, Andrew Divoff, and Devani Pinn, meet their maker in bloody ways, I understand there's a little bit of thrill in that. The true standout, in more of a train wreck style, is Jonathan Lipnicki. You know, the kid from Jerry Maguire? He's playing a complete spaz and delivers an over-the-top screeching and frantic performance that sort of has to be seen to be believed. I don't know if he's having a real mental break or is just that good of an actor, but he brings some kind of specialness to this performance. One of the more annoying aspects of Camp Pleasant Lake is that the victims are online critics, as this grand opening is only open for the press, so in a not-so-subtle way, this is another film that serves as catharsis for creatives who have animosity towards those who dare criticize their work. So the critics are cast in a cartoonish and unlikable manner, rude, demanding, socially ignorant, and simply abhorrent in every way. While there are bad apples, most of the critics I know are simply made up of normal people who feel passionately about what they are criticizing. And while making fun of them and seeing them murdered in your movie might cause the director to chuckle a bit, it doesn't make the story or the buffoonish takes on characters worth investing in, which should be a bigger priority for a film than dunking on the critics. The main problem with Camp Pleasant Lake is that it doesn't know if it wants to be a spoof of a slasher film or a slasher film. Some of the actors feel like they really want to sell this as a straightforward mystery slasher thriller. Then again, some are obviously simply aping for the camera. And then you have Michael Pare, who delivers his usual nonplussed performance as if he receives a partial check every time his various scenes end. And in the world of slasher films, you have to have a pretty strong concept to stand out as a spoof, as the concept has been spoofed since the 80s with Student Bodies, Wacko, and Pandemonium. All of those were pretty great films, and there have been others throughout the years. Either that, or make a serious slasher that tries to scare, thrill, and even nauseate the audience. Sadly, Camp Pleasant Lake is neither. History of Evil is new, streaming on Shudder. It's directed and written by Mirhosseni. In the near future, everything sucks and America is bad. The only hope for humanity is a group of brown and female people who refer to themselves as the Revolution. The revolutionaries attempt to spread the word of the revolution because that's what revolutionaries do, traveling under the cover of the forests and holding up in an old, dark house. Also, did I mention that America is bad? Well, you're going to hear that a lot in this movie. Oh, and there are ghosts. I'm sorry, but I hate films that wear their politics on their sleeve. Just from reading the synopsis of History of Evil, I knew politics was going to be front and center of this one. But since it was a Shudder release, and usually they have a pretty good choice of films on a consistent basis, I went against my better judgment and watched it anyway. Aside from being so left-leaning that it topples over from a slight breeze, the main problem with History of Evil is that it fails to really deliver any character whatsoever. People are who they are at face value and very little else. The revolutionaries are brown and female, mostly, so obviously they're the good guys. Most of the military are white, good old boys who take a little too much joy in the power they have and the guns they have to back that power up. They're all just walking cliches, making it very hard to care about any of them. Simply what they look like isn't enough to make you care, yet this movie seems to want to make it that way. You don't even get to know the members of the Revolution other than the fact that we are told that they are important to the future. Paul Wesley from The Vampire Diaries and also Star Trek Strange New Worlds plays Ron, who at the beginning reunites his wife Allegra, played by Orange is the New Black's Jackie Cruz, with their daughter. For most of the film, Allegra is trying to reconnect with a daughter who hasn't had a mom in her life. So the three are trying to reestablish their new family. But there's no chemistry between Ron and Allegra. They rarely share the screen together, or a quiet moment between them to establish any connections. They're too busy politicizing for any of that to go on. And with reuniting the family being such a major goal of the film, that's a problem. Especially when Ron keeps on going out to the bomb shelter to talk with the ghost of a former member of the KKK every chance he gets once they get to the old dark house. So much effort and time is spent on the destruction of this family unit that the film forgets to let us know why they are together in the first place. The ghosts in History of Evil feel almost like an afterthought. It's as if writer-director Mirhosseni downloaded every hysterical worst-case scenario from cable news into his script, such as checkpoints where you have to swear allegiance to America on a digital Bible, skies filled with military helicopters, an underground railroad established to transport those wanted as rebels who don't follow the oppressive law of the land. Oh yeah, and then there are the ghosts in the safe house that they're staying in. Because he's white, Ron visits the Klansmen in the bomb shelter way too many times, paving the way for the cliched betrayal of the father to his family that has been established in every haunted house movie, from the Amityville Horror to Poltergeist to Insidious to most recently Night Swim. Play a new song, haunted house movies. Simply put, when you don't know the characters, you don't care about them. History of Evil is so heavy-handed, its knuckles drag on the ground. When the film isn't focused on the fascist military hunting down poor, persecuted revolutionaries, we're treated to one long discourse after another between two or more characters about what's wrong with this country, why it got that way, and what direction it should head to next. The script is all ideas or fears of what a totalitarian government might be, and forgets to add the details that actually make us give a shit about those affected by it. It's all hysterical, dire scenario situations amped to 11, but there's no investment because everything seems to be stated without emotion or depth. I fear a new onslaught of politicized horror is on its way with the election coming, and especially after Alex Garland's Civil War releases. Sometimes that can be cool. David Cronenberg was able to have some political commentary in Crimes of the Future, and his son did the same in Infinity Pool. These commentaries on the state of the current world were so potent because it had character, worked with metaphor, and remembered to not get so steeped in current politics that it immediately dates your film and results in people fleeing to their political corners for solace after watching. Unfortunately, there are way too many people out there who aren't as talented as the Cronenbergs, who feel the need to plaster their political beliefs on the screen with little to no metaphorical veil, which immediately offends and dispels half of the audience. Left or right, I hate those types of films, and History of Evil is one of them. Beware the Boogeyman is new on digital download and on demand from Breaking Glass Pictures. It's directed and written by Calvin Morie McCarthy. Beware the Boogeyman takes a page from Amicus's Asylum, wherein a new psychologist visits a mental facility, and the stories come from the backstories of its patients. Using the orientation of the new psychologist, Dr. Tristan McKenzie, played by We Are Still Here and Girl on the Third Floor's Alyssa Dowling, as a wraparound segment, the film acts as an anthology about patients all suffering from a similar psychosis. A monster they refer to as the Boogeyman haunts their waking and sleeping hours. This is the part of the review where I would dissect each segment of the anthology with a few words, but in Beware of the Boogeyman, almost all of the short segments are pretty much exactly the same. A person believes they have encountered a malevolent force commonly known as the Boogeyman and are proven right, leading them to the asylum. One person has been haunted by the Boogeyman since she was a child. One started a medication and began seeing the Boogeyman. One begins seeing the Boogeyman after he commits a murder and tries to dispose of a body. Another is trying to prove his innocence of murdering his wife by capturing the Boogeyman on tape. My favorite of the bunch is the final story where a drug addict begins seeing the Boogeyman after using crack and drinking hand sanitizer. Don't try that at home, kids. Sure, these are all okay premises, I guess, but every story ends the same. The Boogeyman is real, and these people end up in the loony bin. That makes for some predictable stories that don't feel well thought through. I'll give Beware the Boogeyman one thing. It appears that the writer, who is also the filmmaker, Calvin Morie McCarthy, knows his stuff about psychological jargon. The technical speak between the female doctors who are looking through these cases' files are pretty solid, arguing different theories and coming up with possible diagnoses. Now, it really isn't ethical for psychologists to diagnose a client without meeting them first, but discussions and hypothesizing the causes and details of the psychosis is fair game, especially between peers while discussing common patients. I would assume filmmaker McCarthy has some background in psychology, as he writes the terminology very well. At the very least, Beware of the Boogeyman has an air of authenticity in that area. But that's about it in terms of positives that I can give Beware the Boogeyman. It's predictable and rather flatly shot. There's a nice little animated sequence bringing to life a bedtime story about a dead dog, but other than that, everything feels overly staged, gaudily lit, and quickly written. I think had one of these stories been fleshed out, it might have been a stronger concept. But as is, Beware the Boogeyman just didn't work for me. Stranger in the Woods is new on demand from Red Hound Entertainment. It's directed by Adam Newacheck and written by Holly Kenney. Olivia, played by Holly Kenney, who also wrote this film, is recovering from a possible suicide attempt, though she insists that someone broke into her house and attacked her. Her best friend Sam, played by Brendan Brown, decides to take Olivia and her friends to a cabin in the woods. Next door to the cabin, Sam's socially awkward brother Clayton, played by Teddy Spencer, lives off the land, trapping animals cooking them, and using their hides for his taxidermy hobby. Though they are trying to have a good time, the weekend is riddled with problems, from strange interactions with Clayton to Olivia's dog going missing. Even though her friends believe she's mentally fragile, Olivia believes someone very real is stalking her in the woods. Stranger in the Woods is a whodunit of sorts. The focal question of the story is whether Olivia was attacked or if she just made an attempt to take her own life. While her friends are trying to be supportive, Olivia's continued fragile state seems to be wearing thin on them all. Because the acting is pretty solid by the entire cast, this predicament maintained my interest all the way through the film, as I tried to piece together this little conundrum as it played out. I'm not going to spoil the answer to whether or not there is a stalker, but there wouldn't really be a movie if there wasn't, would there? That said, everyone plays their part well. Holly Kenney wrote the screenplay for Stranger in the Woods, on top of leading the film as Olivia, and is able to reach the emotional level necessary for this desperate situation. Brendan Brown is equally good as Olivia's potential romantic interest, as he's given some pretty intense scenes to chew on. But the true standout of the film is the offbeat Clayton, played by Teddy Spencer, whose strange sense of what's appropriate to talk about and awkward interactions with the group make for some of the most uncomfortable and most memorable scenes of the movie. This movie really does a good job of fleshing out characters, as even the lesser parts of the film bring their A game. That said, this is a pretty unsensational little film that kind of feels like a slightly more intense Lifetime thriller than a straight-up horror movie. While the stakes eventually get pretty high, the time it takes to get there is a fair bit, as the film teeters on whether things are really happening the way Olivia perceives them, or if it's all in her mind, goes on a little too long for me. I could have gone for a higher body count too, and maybe a bit more gore to really make this one feel like it had teeth. Instead, the end result feels safe, and while there are some nice twists along the way, I still felt a lot of cliches were utilized in order to make it all work. I'm going to give Stranger in the Woods a mild recommendation. It's not required viewing, but the performances definitely elevate the material quite a bit. Well, there are 4 low-budget, independent films for you. If none of these stood out to you, I'm going to have another batch on Monday too, so be sure to come back and look for that one. Until then, have you seen any of these films? If not, which ones look good to you? Let me know down in the comments.
You're doomed to live the life you're meant to be, stuck inside your reality. You're doomed. Oh, you're doomed. You're doomed. God live the life that you are meant to be. Live inside